right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick Strength and Power. So the prejudging for the 2025 New York Pro just wrapped up. And the top four looks to be Nick Walker, William Bonac, Regan Grimes, and Michael Krizo. Sas Harati was in the first call-out, but he was outside of that final four call-out. And I got to say, Regan really impressed me here. It did seem like towards the end he was really sweating a lot and maybe fading. But this might be one of my favorite versions of Regan that we've ever seen. In fact, I actually think in the very first call-out, at the beginning of prejudging, they might have been comparing Regan for second. They had him next to Nick the whole time. I think Nick is winning this. But I think Regan fading towards the end in that four-man call-out where he was really sweating, his tan was coming off, it seemed like his physique was fading. I think that might have dropped him down to third. Because in the beginning, it was like one of the best Regans that I'd ever seen, and I thought, maybe he's really in the conversation for top two here. Regan really did look great. I think he surprised a lot of people here, myself included. I mean, the fact that Regan announced this so last minute, and it was like a couple weeks out, and he said he just decided that day that he was doing the show, and I thought maybe that means he wasn't super confident going into the show, the fact that it was such a last-minute decision. But I think Regan really looked great here. This is one of the better looks that I've seen him have, one of the bigger looks that I've seen him have. He brought really good conditioning. And just because he's such a big guy, he's such an imposing guy on stage, just height and size-wise, I felt like my eyes were drawn to him a lot during this prejudging. And that's kind of why I thought in the beginning they might be comparing him for second. But I think now it's between Bonac and Nick, because when they did that four-man call-out, they moved Krizo and Regan into the center, but I think the obvious reason they were doing that was because they were comparing them for 3 and 4, and when they did that, they had Bonac on the outside next to Regan, so Nick wasn't even next to Regan in the four-man call-out at all. So I think based on this prejudging, I would have Nick winning, Bonac in second, and I think Regan will probably take third over Michael Krizo. I think he looked better than Krizo here. It's hard to say, though, because like I said, it seemed like towards the end of that prejudging, he was really sweating a lot. He seemed like he was fading. So maybe fourth, but I think he might take third here. This is going to be huge for Regan. And like I said, this is one of the better looks that I've seen Regan have. And as far as Nick, I didn't think Nick looked as good here as he looked in Pittsburgh, but I still think Nick definitely did enough to win. I think there was a pretty good gap for him in first. Bonac looked great here. Bonac is just, when you look at a guy like Bonac next to somebody like Regan, I feel like you really see that seasoned professional stage experience from Bonac. It's like he's just so consistent. And when you watch him pose and you look at how much Regan is sweating and stuff during the prejudging, and Bonac is just, consistently the same all throughout. I mean, it just shows you that experience because I wonder if Regan was fading so much because we haven't seen him compete in a while and he hasn't competed as often. And I wonder if he's just a little bit rusty coming back. Even though he looked great, I think when you see him next to Bonac and you just see how consistent Bonac is, I think that just shows, Bonac competing so often year to year. It just gives him that really good stage presence and confidence on stage where you don't see him, pouring sweat by the end of prejudging because he's done this, 100 times. But I definitely want to give props to Regan here. I think he surprised a lot of people with how he looked. I think maybe there's still a conversation for him to be second, but, like I said, that fading towards the end of prejudging, I think might have taken him out of second, especially when they moved, that Krizo-Regan comparison in the center with Bonac to the other side of Regan. But, man, he was one of the standouts of the show for me. This was a big surprise. And I said, going into the show, Regan is a wild card in this thing, and he proved that to be the case. He's a wild card. I don't think people really expected him to be up there. In that first call-out, the six-man, they had him right next to Nick the whole time, and I think that was a big surprise for a lot of people. So I think Regan really looked great. Like I said, my eyes were drawn to him through the majority of prejudging, and he's definitely looking at a top 3 spot here. And I think with Nick, he definitely did enough to win. I mean, there was no Martin Fitzwater here. There was no Derek Lunsford here. There was a pretty good gap between Nick and Bonac at the Pittsburgh show. And I think you probably have the same thing here. If we go Nick in first, Bonac in second, Regan third, Krizo in fourth, I think that Nick is definitely a solid first place here. Really no question for me. And then as far as Classic Physique, from what I've seen so far, I've got Terrence winning this one again. It seems to be kind of almost an exact rematch for that top two, him and Jose. Jose kind of brought the same qualities that he brought to Pittsburgh. Very conditioned, taller guy than Ruff, so he's got a little bit more size. But Ruff brings that really classic shape, that really classic structure, those really classic lines. And from what I've seen, Ruff looked a little bit tighter here to me than he looked at the Pittsburgh show. So I've got Ruff Diesel winning this one again and defending his Pittsburgh title at New York. I think he's going to win both. I think he's going to win the New York Pro. I'm still seeing a lot of people saying they've got Jose winning, but I think it's the same thing in Pittsburgh. I think that Terrence is just a better embodiment of that classic look as far as structure, shape, lines, and I think he was tighter here. So I think that's going to close that gap a little bit, and maybe you'll see maybe a more decisive victory here from Ruff than we saw in Pittsburgh. So I do think this was a really good version of Terrence. I still think at the Olympia level, if we're talking about Terrence getting back into that conversation for a top spot in the Classic Olympia, I still think even from this version of his physique, he still needs to tighten up the conditioning a little bit. Because if you got a guy like Jose pushing him, you would imagine Ramon Dino, Urs Kalasinski, Mike Sommerfeld, Michael DeBull. Some of those guys are going to push Terrence a lot harder from a conditioning standpoint than Jose will, and from a size standpoint than Jose will. So I still think it needs to be another level for the Olympia. But here, I think it's good enough to win. Looking over at 212, from what I've seen, I thought Cody Drobot looked really impressive. But based on the call-outs, I think they're going with Angel Calderon winning this show. But I thought Cody looked great here, too. It was kind of like Angel was like the little mini mass monster here. And Cody brought a really pleasing physique. Very aesthetic, but I think they're going to go with Angel for the win here. So my picks, Open, Nick Walker is winning. Classic, Terrence Ruffin is winning. 212, I'm going with Angel on this one. Now, the final story that I've got for you guys today, just to wrap this all into one, Larry Wheels. So it turns out that Larry is doing both bodybuilding and classic physique at this Ireland show. So that was kind of the confusion yesterday. He is doing both, so apparently he did make weight for classic physique. The bodybuilding part of the show is done, and Larry Wheels took fourth place there. Now, it kind of looked like even the posing trunks that he was wearing for bodybuilding were classic trunks. So I don't know if he was initially planning on doing both categories, bodybuilding and classic, but it went about as you would expect it to go on the bodybuilding side. Larry ended up taking fourth place. And I think this comes down to kind of what I said going into the show. I think with Larry's physique and his height and his lower body specifically, I think his physique is better suited for classic physique. And I think when you watch him pose for bodybuilding, you see that. I think he's a much better fit for classic, and it was going to be much harder for him to do well as an open guy and turn pro as an open guy, as you saw here. And I think as well his conditioning left something to be desired here. But I think he will do better in classic physique. We still have to wait and see what happens there. I definitely think he's got a better shot at winning that. But men's open bodybuilding, he turned out in fourth. And when I looked at the other guys, I think it did come down to a big factor here was the lower body. And like I said, with Larry's height, I think that's better suited for classic physique, unless the weight cap is something that he struggles with. I mean, this whole weigh-in thing yesterday seemed to be a point of contention, even though Larry said he made weight. But if he does struggle making that weight because he is a big guy, he's a tall guy, maybe that will impact, and maybe that has impacted his conditioning. Like I said, for open bodybuilding, maybe because of the fact that he knows he has to be under that weight for classic, that could have impacted his look in open. It could have impacted the fullness of his legs. It could have impacted his conditioning. And I guess we'll see what happens in classic. But I do think his physique is a much better fit there, especially after seeing him in this open class. But we'll cover that later today and see if Larry ends up getting a pro card. But All right, and literally as I'm recording this video, it was just announced that Larry Wheels in Classic Physique has won his IFBB Pro card at the Muscle Contest show this weekend. So, really big news. I got to say, I'm not surprised that he did better in Classic Physique. Based on everything that I just said earlier, I'm not surprised that he did better in Classic Physique than he did in open bodybuilding. I think he's much better suited for that. And I guess this means that we're going to see Larry compete in the Pro Classic Physique portion of this show to try to qualify for the Olympia. So we might see all of that happen in one weekend. So a lot of people seem kind of disappointed and negative towards Larry Wheels after the bodybuilding ended. But now he just won his Pro card in Classic Physique. So very interesting stuff. What an exciting weekend, man, and what an exciting year for bodybuilding. Sam Sulek won his Pro card this year. Now Larry Wheels, two of the biggest, bodybuilding fitness influencers there are, just turned pro. So congratulations to Larry Wheels, and I'm looking forward to seeing him compete as a Classic Physique Pro. I want to see how he does here, but definitely a better fit for Classic than bodybuilding. I didn't think there was really a chance of him getting the bodybuilding Pro card, especially based on seeing his previous attempts at getting the bodybuilding Pro card, but Larry Wheels is now your newest Classic Physique Pro. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. What are your predictions for all the divisions of the New York Pro? And what are your predictions for Larry Wheels as he prepares to compete in Classic Physique later today? Make sure you guys like the video, subscribe to the channel, click that bell notification icon if you have not already. And as always, I love you guys. Appreciate you guys. Nick Strength and Power signing out. All right, guys, don't forget to click that like button and subscribe to this channel if you enjoy the content. Also, check out my Instagram at Nick Strength Power, my Facebook page, which is simply Nick Strength and Power, my secondary YouTube channel, Nick Strength and Vlogs, for vlogs and bonus content that you will not see on this channel. And consider subscribing to my third YouTube channel, Nick Strength and Pokemon, which is all things Pokemon and trading card games, completely unrelated to this channel. So if you're into that, give that one a look. And all links to merchandise and social media will be in the description box below. If you guys want a Nick Strength and Power t-shirt, that will be in the Shopify link below. Have a great day.